So, welcome back. And in this video, we want to talk in more detail about how our brain patterns are contagious because they influence how we perceive and treat others. So, as you see here, we have the three boxes for how you're interacting and the three boxes for how the other person or group is interacting. And when people come together in Brain 1.0, we often see unhealthy conflict or avoidance. When people come together in Brain 2.0, the interaction is often transactional or competitive. And when you mix them together, often what people are experiencing is domination or resentment. And it doesn't necessarily make you feel like you belong, right? Everyone feels insecure when we're interacting in Brain 1.0 and Brain 2.0. And for the most part, we're transmitting pain and suffering when we're in this state. And then if we can bring ourselves into Brain 3.0 and interact that way, what we experience is true collaboration and a higher level of creativity. And that's what I mean by conscious co-creation. And then when we are ourselves in Brain 3.0 and we meet someone in Brain 1.0, we don't necessarily get triggered to go there. We actually can remain anchored in Brain 3.0, and through what we embody through our presence, help them experience empathy and compassion, which will allow them to slowly come out of Brain 1.0, not necessarily immediately, but at least it doesn't escalate their feelings.
You know, when I'm facilitating a meeting in community, this contagion that you described is a beautiful way of expressing it, because what you bring into the meeting is contagious. And when people are tugging at each other, when they're communicating in the red box, they're transmitting pain and suffering. What I always try to do is structure a conversation for an adult. I want to create the setting for an adult conversation. I want to get to collaboration and creativity. Looking at this slide, I see that the path to collaboration and creativity is not a direct path. I have to create empathy and compassion to then bring them to that place, because they're not going to get there without somebody creating empathy and compassion for where they are so that they can find their way to that corner.
That's a very powerful insight. And similarly, when we're engaging with people in Brain 2.0, we don't have to compete or transact, right? We can actually connect to their hearts, inspire and support them to see a bigger picture, to take a more holistic view of the situation, to feel their own humanity and to see the humanity in others, right? And that allows them to also experience a higher level of consciousness.
So in collective impact, I do this all the time, but I didn't know what I was doing. Calm clarity is giving me, what you're giving me is language to support what I was doing. That invitation to an adult conversation, which is the way I would phrase it. I invite you to an adult conversation. But I was, in a way, treating them like children, as if they weren't adults, and that wasn't fair. But it worked. This could be a smoother way that they could do it themselves. Move from 1.0 to 2.0 to 3.0, and in their transactions, invite the same thing from the person that they're talking to. See if they're in 1.0, see if they're in 2.0, and following these green boxes, get to the corner and have a decent conversation.
And that's important to recognize, because when we can bring ourselves into Brain 3.0, we transmit wholeness. We help build belonging, trust, and connectedness. And that's a completely different thing than when we're in Brain 1.0 and Brain 2.0, spreading insecurity and disconnection. And what I have found when I've done workshops in the community for youth development or workforce development, whenever we share this information, we share the framework and we share the slide, everybody will say, I want to be in that blue zone. I want to experience wholeness. I want to transmit wholeness to my family, the people around me. I feel stuck when I'm in this red zone, right? Transmitting pain and suffering. I'm hurting. And the last thing I want to do is pass this on. However, I don't have the skills or the tools to know how to get into the blue zone. And so as we give them those tools and those skills, people are so hungry and so ready for it.
What a gift. What a gift. I can't think of any situation where that would not be an improvement, whether it's at the family dinner table or in the office boardroom. This is a step in the right direction, no matter where you are.
I've heard parents tell me how this transforms the way they parent their children. It used to be that they would get triggered and stressed out in Brain 1.0, and then they would vent and yell at their children, right? And their children don't fully understand what's going on and the burden that their parents are facing, but then it creates that burden for the child too. When the parent can bring themselves into Brain 3.0 and see the child as a child who didn't do this on purpose, right? Doesn't need to be blamed and shamed for it. They can then help the child build Brain 3.0 to learn from the situation and handle it better in the future. And that type of transformation is what we need to start talking about. Everybody whose ancestors have been through trauma, everybody who has parents who've experienced trauma inherits coping mechanisms, survival mechanisms through their family, right? And how well we interact with others and ourselves depends on how well Brain 3.0 can oversee these innate survival mechanisms. And scientists have labeled these mechanisms a freeze response, a flee response, a fight response, or a fawn response, right? And so what happens is when you're experiencing a threat, freezing allows you to conserve energy, to reduce your visibility, to avoid detection. And there's a way in which you can do that in a functional way in Brain 3.0 or a dysfunctional way in Brain 1.0 and Brain 2.0. And so in Brain 1.0 and 2.0, what we're seeing in a lot of communities is chronic depression, dissociation, shutting down, not having the energy for daily tasks, succumbing to negativity and despair. And when they're able to transform this into Brain 3.0, they can actually rest and recharge to gather energy and strength for the next challenge. And that's so important to be able to unblock that energy so you can recharge and have the energy to move forward. And then with the flee response, its purpose is to help us avoid or remove ourselves from threat and danger. But when it's dysfunctional, what I observe is chronic restlessness, escapism. You can call that procrastination, avoidance of triggers, reliance on addictive substances or behaviors to numb and suppress negative feelings. And then when we do it in a healthy way, what we're doing is setting boundaries. We're accurately discerning and mitigating our exposure to threat and harm. And that's so important. And then with the fight response, its purpose is to attack the threat to protect ourselves or our loved ones. And when it's dysfunctional, it shows up as chronic hypervigilance and aggressiveness towards perceived potential threats. It comes out often as bullying or abusing others to increase or maintain power and control or relieve distress. Baboons do this, right? Primates do this. Humans do it too. And when we transform it in Brain 3.0, what we see is the more courage to take a stand to call out unfair treatment and rectify wrongs. That's really powerful.
That's a fight worth having.
Exactly. And then with the fawn response, this evolved when you couldn't experience any more safety or survival by freezing, fleeing, or fighting. So instead, you increase your safety and survival by providing value to the source of danger. When it's dysfunctional, it comes out as a compulsiveness to maintain or improve your status or safety by being of value to systems and groups that harm, abuse, or oppress people. A common pop culture name for this is Stockholm Syndrome, but it is a strategy that did ensure survival when there were no other strategies that were more effective.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And when we transform this, and you see this commonly with model minorities, right? We cultivate skills, expertise, respect, and assets to serve as an advocate and champion for victims and outgroups. W.B. Du Bois advocated for this. Booker T. Washington advocated for this, right? that you have to build assets before you can become a change agent.
It's a different way of fighting, isn't it? Fawning this way is a equipping for the righteous fight.
Martin Luther King had to constantly fundraise to help the civil rights movement battle the legal battles, right?
That's right. Bail money, lawyer money. It was very expensive.
And again, he's an example, role model of how you can do freeze, flee, fight, fawn in Brain 3.0.
Yes, it's genetic. We've evolved these responses to threats, and it's almost like part of our autopilot to do it. But in 3.0, we can train our autopilot to do it in a way that is constructive rather than destructive.
And how much more powerful would it be if all the nonprofits who are working for community economic development, if all the grassroots organizations could identify and observe these patterns and transform and shift them?
Maybe even an academy to help them with that.
I believe the rate of change would be so much faster.
So much faster. I completely agree with you.
Because now it's like we take 1 or 2 steps forward, and then traumatic experiences take us 3 steps back. It's always a challenge when people feel that fawning is the best way to deal with safety and maintaining their position.
Right, rather than fighting or preparing. The hero is the fighter, the warrior cultivates skills, expertise, and respect, and they advocate. You need both. You need the hero and the warrior. And this explains it in a way that I could take that to communities. You need to fight, but you also need to be prepared. Hero, warrior, need both.
Well, it's about calling in instead of just calling out, right? And so a person who has transformed their fawn response is an expert collaborator who can be bipartisan, he can work across coalitions, right? I think that our biggest challenge in terms of leaders is learning how to integrate and call in opponents and turn them into allies.
Yeah, you convert them. They're not really opponents. They're just seeking a different outcome in a dysfunctional way.
And sometimes everyone wants the same outcome, but it's how we disagree on how to get there.
Isn't that marvelous? Because most of the time they do want the same outcome, but they just have different means of getting there. There's nothing wrong with the different means. They just need to be harmonized.
It goes back to that interaction chart, right? Because we are interacting in Brain 1.0 and 2.0 in a disconnected, dissociated way, we're unable to build coalitions. It's when we are interacting in Brain 3.0 that we can then work across differences. We can build bridges and come together to co-create.
That is so true. I see it. And I can see the usefulness of it in the community development setting.
And so now let's talk a bit about how neuroscience can help us make this transformation. With Calm Clarity, we have a user manual to help people rewire their brain, and it builds around this framework that we've shared earlier. And the inspiration comes from a quote attributed to Albert Einstein that no problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. And so we won't be able to solve any problems if we're in Brain 1.0 or Brain 2.0. We need to be in Brain 3.0 to solve our problems. And my key observations from growing up in the inner city as a refugee and seeing it in many different communities, the Black community, the Southeast Asian communities, and others, the more traumatic experiences that a person and their ancestors lived through, the stronger their Brain 1.0 will be, and the more likely they will instinctively use Brain 2.0 to escape from, numb, and suppress negative and uncomfortable feelings and sensations. By learning how to intentionally develop and strengthen the neural networks of Brain 3.0, people gain the ability to observe, calm, and regulate Brain 1.0 and Brain 2.0. The earlier young people receive training to develop Brain 3.0, the earlier they can enhance their ability to learn, concentrate, self regulate, build healthy relationships and connections, and serve as leaders in their communities.
That's powerful insights. I really, really agree with what you're saying here. And it fits with my lived experience that younger people are more pliable, and that works both ways. If they have these traumatic experiences, it can train their subconscious in bad habits and makes the retraining more difficult, but not impossible.
And the key is to give them a user manual. And so for me, this starts with Viktor Frankl's quote: between stimulus and response, there is a space. And that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. And what that means is that when we're noticing that brain 1.0 or 2.0 are triggered, we have to hold space and intentionally activate brain 3.0 to respond with wisdom. You don't just carry out whatever brain 1.0 or 2.0 tell you to do. You try to activate brain 3.0.
So we need to leave some space for that to happen.
Yes, right? Because brain 1.0 and 2.0 are faster. And so what we see with how the brain works is when there's a stimulus, the path through brain 1.0 is the fastest path. And often we don't like the way that feels. So we'll go into brain 2.0 to make those feelings go away, right? We'll fixate on what makes us feel good, what makes us feel better. In the case of you and me, it was overachieving, but sometimes it's eating sugar. Sometimes it's drinking, right? Sometimes it's therapy shopping. And so if we can observe this, we can then decide to shift into brain 3.0. And as brain 3.0 gets stronger and stronger, sometimes you'll go directly from stimulus to brain 3.0. So you can tell which of these brain patterns are strongest in you because they're the ones that take over when you're triggered by stress. And the stronger brain 3.0 is, the easier it is for you to access it during a crisis, enabling you to respond more effectively. To build brain 3.0, I practice techniques I call mind hacking, which means steering brain development to enhance the best parts of being human, to experience more physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual alignment, well-being, wholeness, and integration. When we do the mind hacking, what we're doing is we're strengthening 4 key neural systems that allow us to live more and more in brain 3.0. We're strengthening the attention system, the resilience system, the meta-awareness system, and the connection system. So tune in for the next video to learn more about these systems.